We are discussing Judas's perspective on the crucifixion from the 1973 movie Jesus Christ Superstar. So this movie is Drew's pick. He recommended it. It is a musical, so a little different for us.
Rock
Drew, do you want
opera.
to tell us? Yeah, rock opera. Do you want to tell us what made you want to do this film and what's unique and different about it?
Yeah, okay, so the first time I ever watched this movie, I was in high school, and I had heard the song Jesus Christ Superstar played on the radio before, and I knew it came from this Broadway play. I didn't know much about this at all. So I was kind of curious about, what is this Jesus Christ Superstar? And I was told it was a rock opera. I'm like, that sounds really cool, And I had also heard through, going to church or going to like a youth groups and stuff like that, bringing it up. I also heard that this movie wasn't well received by a lot of the religious crowd. So that just made me want to watch it a little bit more because I wanted to see what is it about this? What's so controversial about this film? So I went to Blockbuster Video, for those of you old enough to remember what a Blockbuster Video is. And I bought the VHS cassette tape and I went home and I put it in. And we actually had like a viewing party with some of the guys and girls from the youth group. We all gathered at somebody's house and we watched it for the first time. And I was immediately just like hooked on it because I thought the music was so cool. And I thought it was an interesting perspective. And I can see where some people might have thought like, okay, this might be sacrilegious. It's just because they're portraying Jesus in a different light than what you read from the Bible. But it's taken from a different perspective. It's taken from the perspective of Judas. So obviously Judas had a different view of Christ than what was written. And I thought that was interesting. I was like, all right, there's just like a different side of the same story. And I think I went out that weekend and I bought the original cast recording, which is right here, but I bought it on CD. I've got it memorized. I can do every song word for word. And I just think it's a really interesting. I'm not real big on musicals. I don't like when people bust out in a song for no reason. I have a hard time sitting down watching those. But I make an exception on a couple. But this one I think is just fun because there's no spoken dialogue. It's all 100% singing. And these guys have these like heavy metal voices that they're coming out with and these high-pitched screams. It's like, this is so cool. How come people don't like this? That was my phone. I'm going to turn that off.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this isn't a musical, actually, because, and Drew kind of pointed that out, musicals are dramas where people do break into song. This is an opera, in film form.
Yeah.
There's no dialogue. There's no, hey, what's up, Jesus? Oh, not much. I'm here, la, 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 nothing like that. It's straight up
100%
opera,
yeah,
all singing. So that's something to keep in mind too for people who do like musicals who've never seen an opera. It's a little bit different. So
yeah,
but still cool. But
I'm glad you pointed that out though, because
sure. Yeah.
I didn't catch that difference. I thought of this as a musical until you said that. I realized that the musicals I've seen do have dialogue and lines in between the songs. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
So this was written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, and they've done, Cats,
all the musicals
on Broadway. And they wanted to do this one, and they couldn't get the backing for it. So they thought, well, we'll just do an album. So they got Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. They got Murray Head. They went into a recording studio. They recorded an album, which is what this is. The album became really popular. Now they got people saying, okay, yeah, we'll fund you, and we'll do a Broadway play. So then they put it on Broadway. And then in 1973, or this was released in 1970. In 1973, they turned it into the film. And I mean, I have never seen a Broadway production of this, but Doug has.
I have.
And Doug got to see
an interesting cast choice.
Yeah.
I don't remember anybody else, but the gentleman who played Jesus was none other than Sebastian Bach, who was the lead singer of Skid Row.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I mean, and that was the first time. I mean, ashamed to say I've heard the musical, but I never watched the movie until after I saw all the plays. So we're talking mid to late 2000s, 2008, 9, something like that. So, yeah, that was the first time I actually saw it visually and actually, straight through, because I'll listen to the CD I had at the time and, kind of skip and hit the songs I like. And I didn't listen to it a lot, like I did other musicals or operas. However, I did like it. But yeah, when I saw it with live on stage, and Sebastian Bach, if nobody knows who he is, he has that heavy metal voice and can hit those high notes.
Yeah.
And even in the mid 2000s, he was still hitting those notes pretty well, which is cool for somebody who's been singing like that for almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was really cool live, and I liked it better live actually. So
I would love to see it live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when this movie started and I heard some of those guitar riffs, they've got kind of that old 60s, 70s distortion. It's not a lot of high gain. I'm a guitar player, so I noticed these things. But I could tell these riffs. I was like, well, these would be cool live with a cranked up amp, a half stack. Or if they modernized it, play the exact same riff with modern metal guitar. I mean, it could be pretty beefy and pretty powerful.
You've tried it, haven't you?
I thought about it. I'm gonna have to learn
Next
that main
project.
theme. I was gonna ask you, do you think that there's any connection between this movie, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Green Day's rock opera, Jesus of Suburbia?
I don't
I
know.
don't know that one very well.
I don't know it that well either.
Oh, I love that song. It's like a 10-minute Green Day song. I doubt there's a connection, but because they're both rock operas and they're both, have some semblance of Jesus in them, I wondered if there was any connection in Billy Joe Armstrong's head when he wrote that song.
It's possible. Quite possible. But yeah, I love that opening guitar riff.
Yeah.
Just how it starts
exactly
off. Just that little over and over. It's like, it's so cool.
This movie also, it seems to take some inspiration from Godspell. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's actually a very similar musical. I'm trying to think if it was a musical or if it was a rock opera like this. But when they got off the bus at the beginning of this, I mean, it reminded me, just the whole feel and kind of the hippie feel, it reminded me of Godspell. In Godspell, Victor Garber, the guy who plays Jack Bristow on Alias, played Jesus. So it was interesting. He plays a clown in that one, and it's not quite, I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar actually does kind of look like it's supposed to take place in biblical times, except when they whip out like modern guns and stuff.
Yeah.
So I figured they were trying to make some kind of modern day commentary there. Well, so we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But Godspell is more set in the 60s, it seems.
Yeah.
But I could tell they borrowed that feel,
Yeah. Yeah. This one was interesting. Like I said, the first time I watched it, I knowing that this is about the last couple days of Jesus' life, it starts with a bus pulling up and all these people hopping out of this bus, hippie style. And you're like, what is this? And then, of course, at the end of the film, they all get back on the bus and they drive away. And they have like a tank and airplanes and guns. And you're like, what?
Machine guns.
Yeah, it's like, this is really interesting. But at the same time, they filmed this all in Jerusalem and in actual accurate places. So it kind of gave it that authentic feel that way, except for it's a very interesting way of filming this movie.
Yeah, I have a question for you when we get to that part later where the airplanes come out and stuff. But here at the beginning, I mean, one of the main characters we see right off the bat is Judas. And you get to really hear his voice and the doubt that he was wrestling with. So I did think it was interesting. Judas is portrayed as a doubter at the beginning, and he doesn't like Mary Magdalene.
No.
He thinks that Jesus shouldn't be hanging out with her because she's a prostitute, which, okay, historically, that might be incorrect. So if you try to trace that backwards, the whole idea that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute doesn't pop up until about 600 AD. Pope Gregory he actually kind of perpetuated that. So we don't know if there was some kind of oral tradition until that point and she really was a prostitute, or if somehow that got added to the story. And if that's the case, I feel really bad for Mary Magdalene. But if you look this up on history.com or Christianity.com, even Christianity.com says this might be a fabrication. She may have just been someone who was demon possessed that Jesus healed and not really a prostitute. So I thought, oh, I feel sorry for her. We don't really know either way.
Right. Yeah. No, that
works well in the story, though.
It does, and I mean, I think that's how I think they went with that, because that's the popular belief or the popular opinion. So.
Well, and you get what they're trying to say too. They're trying to say that Jesus is hanging out with the people that nobody else wants to hang around or thinks deserve love, or he's hanging out with the people who are considered immoral, but they need him.
I think that's one of the
misfit toys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to play with a Charlie in the box. I think that's one of his lines that he says too, is when he's talking about, at the very beginning.
Box?
No, he didn't say anything about the Charlie in the box.
Oh,
but he says, he's talking about how, asking Jesus if he cares for his people, because you're starting to get loud and you're starting to get noticed and it's turning attention to you. And if they think you're lying about all these things that you're saying, it's going to be disastrous for us. And Judas goes in during the cave and put an ointment on Jesus's head. He's talking about why are you wasting this ointment when we could have sold it and made all this money to give to the poor? And that's more important than his feet. And, why are you hanging out with her? Because she's not fitting with what you teach and say. So you're not making us look good. That's the whole first part of this act, is Judas is just like, it's like he obviously cares for Jesus. He cares for what's going on, but he's also very nervous about the way we're going about things. Like, do we want this attention? I'm not sure your head's in the right spot. So yeah, it's an interesting take on that. So I don't necessarily know that Judas is a bad guy in this movie, but.
Yeah. And I was wondering, when he's upset about that oil being wasted, right? There's a verse, it's John 12 verse 6. It says Judas didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but he was actually the keeper of the money bag, and he used to help himself to what was in it. So
really?
He used to steal from the pot. Yeah, so I was waiting. I was like, oh, will they go that direction with the character? And I don't think I saw anything like that in the film.
No.
I think he's just looking at Jesus and he's doubting, and he's starting to think, okay, you're becoming a rock star, basically, superstar. And so that made me start to wonder. He starts to say things like, have you forgotten the cause? So then I started to wonder, what does Judas think the cause is? Like, what does he think Jesus's cause is? Why did he decide to follow him? Because I do think that Jesus's followers didn't really understand what his real cause was until close to the end, if not the very end. So I don't know. What do you think Judas's motivation was? What cause did he think he was joining up in the first place?
No, I think Judas is just really worried about the popularity and the attention that they're getting. I think he's all for helping people and, helping the poor and helping the sick, but it's better if we're not well known, because it's almost like there's consequences to Jesus being called the Son of God. And if they think, like you said, if they think you're lying about this, they can find any excuse to put us away. And I think that's the part that he's kind of more nervous about. We're getting too loud. I think that's one of the lines in the song, is we're getting much too loud, and we need to maybe tone this down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense, because he probably knows the way the government is. And, when you have this guy coming around and saying, no, you don't have to do this, you have to do this. And it's like, I don't like them to do that. So it probably pretty easy to put two and two together. So I think he was just in that instance, he was just trying to say, like Drew said, let's take it back a little bit.
Yeah, like he might be mistaken for a revolutionary or something.
Yeah.
I had a theory, but I can't tell if Judas's character ascribed to this ideology or not. So, in the Gospels and the Bible, some of his followers believed that Jesus was going to be a political Messiah. The Jewish writings before Jesus actually was born, they all talked about their Messiah when he came, he was going to liberate them from Rome and judge their enemies and all that stuff. So I was wondering if Judas was going to be coming from that direction. Does he think that Jesus is going to be a political Messiah, and instead he's not. He's more focused on people's spiritual relationship with God. So he's a spiritual Messiah. And then there's that scene where they're dancing and there's pillars around, and this guy comes up to Jesus. I don't know who he is.
Simon.
Simon. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Simon says, "Can you add a touch of hate towards Rome? You'll be remembered forever." And so you do see some of that from him. I was actually glad that the show took that angle and kind of called that out, because I think a lot of people don't realize that even the disciples wanted Jesus to be a political Messiah and overthrow Rome, and he really wasn't interested in that. And you know where Christianity is today, it's kind of sometimes it gets a little bit mixed up in politics, or at least certain sects of it, right? It gets a little bit mixed up in politics. And I think I've noticed this show spoke to that political misconception, and so does The Chosen. We talked about Angel Studios when we covered The Sound of Freedom. So I'm always glad when I see a show that's about Jesus, and they understand who Jesus actually was versus what people wanted him to be. But I can't tell quite where Jesus lands. Do you think that he fell into that, oh, Jesus is going to be the political Messiah, he's going to overthrow Rome, and then became disappointed when he found out that's not on his agenda?
I don't think Judas had anything to... I don't know that Judas wanted them to be political, because he doesn't really mention Rome too much about it. I think he's just more worried about getting the attention of Rome.
Yeah, and getting martyred or something.
In fact,
that's the part that he doesn't like.
I would think at that point, Judas would actually be the complete opposite and be like, I don't want to be political. Let's just continue walking down the road and healing blind people and giving people fish and wine and stuff. And that's good for me, because if they do get political, they're going to have to get loud.
Yeah.
You can't be a quiet politician. So.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
Now Simon Zealots. How do you say his
Simon
name?
the Zealot?
Yes. Thank you. He's the one who sings about Rome. He's the one who comes up to Jesus and he's talking about how, Rome's come in, they've taken over our country, and you can lead us and all that stuff. And yeah, like you said, Jesus turns that away. So he, on the other hand, is a different perspective than what Judas has. He was expecting Christ to be this political figure and drive Rome out of our country. And Jesus is like, yeah, it's not my bag, man.
Yeah, that makes sense then for his character too, because a zealot was this underground political group that was, I don't know what you'd call them. Supposedly they were all about like slitting the Roman soldiers' throats and stuff. So they're chaos agents. Well, do you guys want to talk about that temple scene where the modern guns come out? Like, I was watching this and it didn't really dawn on me that here all of a sudden they're in the temple, they're selling like AK-47s.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Well, there are a couple other things too. If you notice, there's some drug paraphernalia.
Yeah.
One guy's got a little bag of something. So they definitely, with the temple scene, and of course, from the Bible story is he drove all the moneylenders from the temple. And that's what the scene is about. And listening to the lyrics of the song too, when they're talking about like, coming in, one guy says like, I've got heaven, I've got hell is what he's selling. There's prostitutes there. There's drugs. There's guns, grenades, rocket launchers. But it's basically all the stuff that you would not, of destruction or sin. is what they're selling.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Jesus comes in and flips over a few tables and screams at him to get out, which I can't do without hurting somebody.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
But yeah, so instead of just changing money in hands, I mean, they put in a little bit more of the visual of the sin that's being traded and sold in the temple.
Yeah, that was interesting. I seriously didn't catch that there was something out of time there until I'd been watching it for, I don't know, the scene was almost over, and then I'm like, wait, this is
What did I see?
not period correct here. What are they doing with these grenades? So I wondered, does this have anything to do with what was going on at the time in history, like Vietnam or anything?
Vietnam was going full swing right now. You had civil rights movement. You had Vietnam. We're still in a Cold War with Russia. I think the Cuban Missile Crisis at this point had been, I think that was earlier in the 60s.
Yeah, because that was JFK.
Yeah, so, but at this point in the late 60s, early 70s, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of turmoil going on. And I think this movie kind of represents a little bit of that.
I wonder what the statement was supposed to be, though, because like here the religious leaders are selling that stuff. I wonder what they were trying to get at.
Well, I mean, one way to look at it, Drew said that everything that they were selling was sinful. So maybe they were just trying to push that the war, war is sin. Sin is wrong. Therefore, war is wrong. Good God, y'all.
Yeah, that could be
one way to look at it. And it depends, you could look at it, in a fairly dark way that it's, these religious leaders who sell sin that create things like war. And, it's when you have one religion on one side of the country and another, there's so many religious wars even to this day. So, there could be a commentary on that. It's what makes movies great. You can look at things two different ways, and one doesn't have to be right, the other doesn't have to be wrong.
Yeah, all of that makes sense. And I know the temple at the time was fairly corrupt. One thing they were doing at the time, I don't think this is what the movie is trying to comment on. I think they've tweaked it to say something about what was going on in the 70s.
Yeah.
But back in biblical times, there were two areas in the temple. One area was for Jews and one was for everybody else. So people who were not Jewish but wanted to go pray to God or something, they would go to this outer court. And in biblical times, the money changers set up in that area basically pushed those people out of the temple. So now they don't have anywhere to go to connect with God anymore. And then the thought was that the money changers, like, how you would exchange like a US dollar for a Canadian dollar when you go on vacation, and then you can go buy Canadian stuff, right? Well, it's kind of like that. They'd come from out of town and they'd exchange their money at the temple, but they marked up the price. So they're basically gouging these people who were not Jewish, and they've taken over their space to worship God. So they've been shut out of the temple. And if you went into the Jewish area, they could kill you for that. There were signs up that said, don't enter, you will die. So that's what was going on in the biblical story. And that's why Jesus is ticked off, because now everyone doesn't have a place in the temple. But and plus they're ripping people off. But I do think they must have just tweaked this for the times. Maybe it's like Doug said, maybe they feel like somehow a religious agenda, or any church could be corrupt. Not all are. I work at a church, so I'm just saying that when I say that, I'm not meaning everyone. But you've all seen examples of religion going off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they were trying to modernize that. And here's Jesus. He's in contrast to that, because he is the pure. He's the savior, right?
Yeah, I think taken in context of like this movie and being in the 70s, or actually, I mean, this was written in 1970. The movie came out in 73, but 1970, when all this was written, in the context of it, you can take this as it's kind of a metaphor for, a lot of protest over the war, a lot of protest over government, right? And a lot of these were grassroots. A lot of these were small, and this is how we get our message across. And I think that's what this kind of is supposed to be symbolizing, is a smaller movement. And as Judas is afraid of it getting too big and the government coming back at them. And I think that's what they're trying to represent with the money, or instead of money being in the temple, all this other stuff about how they don't want that here, but the government is all about it, making it the war and this and whatever it is.
Yeah. And Judas is pretty upset at Jesus for what he does in the temple, because now he's pretty much gone public.
Yep. Oh, yeah. He's definitely horrified.
Yeah.
What just happened? Judas in this movie does a lot of this. He does a lot of that. A lot of
head shaking. What?
Man, when he sings, he had such a great voice for this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. His name is Carl Anderson, plays Judas in this movie. And I'm just looking up right now to see if he did anything.
In Purple Rain.
Was he in Purple Rain?
Yeah, he was the Reverend.
Was he?
I don't know. I looked it up earlier, but yes, he was.
When we got to the garden scene, when Jesus is at the Garden of Gethsemane,
yes,
I didn't know this was the garden scene right away because it's daylight. So this confuses me. There's no night. I don't know if that's because they'd have trouble shooting at night. There was that song Mary Magdalene saying that was at night, right?
I don't know how to love you. That song?
Yeah,
that was done at night.
Yeah, so when we get
to about the only time she sang. Every other time she was like, "Go to sleep, Jesus."
Let me put some oil on your face.
All she wanted Jesus to do was sleep. It's like, come on, woman.
She's in love with him in this version, isn't she?
Absolutely, 100%.
I feel like it.
I mean, I don't blame her because, I mean, Jesus was an awesome dude, I'm sure, but it is interesting to see that with hindsight.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing this movie did. I know you're getting ready to talk about the garden, but this just popped in. One thing this movie does is it makes the characters seem a little more human.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it gives them a little bit more depth. When you're going into the garden, seeing him and Judas argue. You're talking about the Last Supper scene. Going into where they come and arrest him in the garden, right? Mm-hmm. Or are you talking about when he's in the garden singing to God about why are we doing this?
Right there, yeah.
Okay, so that one.
I always thought of that at night because the disciples are falling asleep during that story.
Yeah.
And here it's like sunny out, and so I didn't realize in my head, like, oh, it's supposed to be dark, so we must not be there yet. And then I'm like, oh wait, that was the garden.
Yeah. So in the film or in the play, Jesus is in the garden and he's talking to God, and it's one of my favorite tracks on the album because Ian Gillan gives a great performance. Ted Neely gave a outstanding performance in the film, but it's Jesus is talking to God like, we're going to do this, so give me the strength to do what I have to do. And then I think at one point he says like, let me finish what we've started. And then he's like, no, I didn't start this. You started this. And if I have to die, can you promise me that I will not die in vain? Like, if I have to drink their cup of poison, they're going to nail me to their cross. Will this have meaning? Because, if we're going to do, because I might change my mind. He's doubting whether or not he wants to do this. So let's do this now before I change my mind. And I thought that was kind of interesting because you never hear that really in the Bible. It was Jesus was this and betrayed and crucified. But this gives him a human element. This is a man who has got to do something that he's not sure if he's a little frightened to do. He's not sure if this is what needs to be done or if it's actually going to work. So I thought that's a very, very powerful point in this film or in the opera.
And it makes sense because in Christianity, the idea is that Jesus is God, right? but when he becomes a man, he loses access to some of his knowledge. Like the idea is God knows everything, right? But if you're actually going to become human, well, part of being human is not knowing everything, not being omniscient. So,
Omnipotent.
yeah, the idea is that Jesus lost access to some of his knowledge. And so he couldn't see everything that God did. So if you couldn't see the end, well, how would you be feeling? If you're
Yeah.
feeling human emotions and you're facing something that's stressful, I
Yeah.
guess this is a real way to go. I could see how maybe people would be uncomfortable when he says, wait, this isn't my plan. This is your
Your
plan.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that being uncomfortable for some. Maybe that was one of the controversial points. I'm not sure. Because then that makes it look like he's not cool with God or he's angry at God. And then that would be harder for some people to accept.
I think so. And I think that's part of the reason why people looked at it as being, oh, this is sacrilegious. Well, I didn't see it that way. I saw it as more of a, no, I mean, Jesus was also a man. He walked on the earth. I'm sure he had questions about, are you sure this is what we have to do here? Because if it is, I'll do it. But just letting you know, I'm not necessarily 100% cool with it.
Yeah.
And I think that makes him a little bit more, and gives him that human element.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that probably scares some people.
Yeah. And apparently, while we're on the subject of the controversial stuff, one of the points that I think this film got a lot of criticism for when it came out is you've got white Jesus and you've got black Judas. And I kind of think that was probably just more coincidence because Judas's voice, that actor is awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was their first choice, but he was the best choice when they start singing, But it made people uncomfortable because you're coming out of the civil rights movement. And I guess I don't totally know what the director's motivation was for the casting, but just because you have a white guy is good and a black guy is evil, that made some people uncomfortable. So that was a point of controversy when this came out. Do you guys know anything else about that?
I did read one thing where they said that, I was just looking it up, that Judas represents kind of what I mentioned earlier. He does represent that grassroots establishment going up against what this article said was the man. So when you think about it, that time when you had civil rights protests and you're trying to go up against and get their freedoms and stuff. So in a way, he kind of was written, at least for the movie part, as a symbolic to that.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, that would make sense.
Yeah, but Murray Head is a white British actor who recorded the original cast recording.
I could see how this could make people uncomfortable then, just given the times.
But the controversy is in the past because when I saw it live with Sebastian Bach, again, I can't remember Judas's name. He was an excellent actor, and he also was black. So obviously the controversy is not continued because if it had, there's no way that would have happened in 2004 or whenever I saw it.
So you're saying that probably wasn't the writers and the director's intent then probably.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, they tried out a few people for the role and he was the best. So
yeah. Cause I thought I read that there was somebody else that this guy beat for the job.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cause he was awesome.
Yeah, he was.
He probably had one of the strongest voices in this whole. He had that punk rock, 1960s gritty voice.
Yeah,
pre-grunge.
He was amazing.
So, did anybody else think that Herod looked like Richard Simmons?
Yeah.
Well, Herod, the guy who played Herod, he's actually a pretty prominent character actor. You've seen him.
Is he really?
Probably in tons of, I looked it up. I'm trying to think of movies or TV shows we've all seen. He was the principal in Happy Gilmore. Or not Happy Gilmore, but...
Billy Madison?
Billy Madison, yeah.
No way.
100%.
Are you serious?
Look him up and look at his face.
He was King Herod?
Yeah.
Josh Mostel. It is him.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? He was in City
Yeah,
Slickers.
Yeah, he's still acting today. Just one of those character actors. No offense, he makes money off this, but he's kind of goofy looking, little overweight. He plays that part well.
His
And that's
dad
the
is
same guy. He's the most popular guy that came out of this.
his dad is Zero Mostel, who
Oh yeah,
is a real popular comedic actor from the 60s and 50s. He was in The Producers, the original. He was in I think he did some Broadway,
that,
like
yeah.
Fiddle on the Roof. Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
I just found that out today too. It's not like I have that knowledge. I was just looking it up before we started. But
I
yeah,
didn't know that.
That's
Yeah, I
fun.
like how they made King Herod a little goofy. Now he's different on the album recording. He doesn't have the goofyish voice.
Oh,
He's
there's
very
a voice in the movie.
Yeah, it's a different actor doing it in the movie than what's on the original album. So the original recording, he had a stronger voice. It was actually a little bit more gruffer. This guy in the film seemed like he could have been a little bit of a pushover. At the very end, when he got mad, aren't you scared of me? And that's how the guy sang it on the album the whole time. But when I first saw the movie and they get to King Herod and he's speaking in this really high voice and he's real soft and he's doing these little dances and stuff, and you're going, this is okay.
I think they were just trying to portray him as a weakling.
Yes. Yeah.
Kill this simple man because he's afraid he's going to take his stuff away. So
And with the style of music that they picked, it fits.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So are all
Kinda
the voices different in the movie from the album then?
Yes. The
Okay,
original cast recording and the film are different cast altogether.
I
100%.
thought Jesus was like lip syncing. I mean, he probably did record these separate, but
oh yeah, they weren't
They didn't
singing that
sing
live out
live
in the
when they-
desert.
No.
yeah, because of the way that his face almost doesn't react enough when he hits some of those high notes.
I was going to mention that. I wonder if they were trying to, that's what they were doing. It's like, you're Jesus, so you don't need to try hard to hit these notes. You just hit them because you're God. So yeah, when he was singing, I was watching that and, he had to hit those high notes and he'd be like, well, I can't do it. But be really high and you'd just be like, oh, la, 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 la. But in reality, you hear much higher than better.
Yeah.
Much better than that too.
Yeah, I'm sure in the studio he had the full eyes closed, leaning back, giving it.
Nobody can sing that high without going.
You got to make a face.
Faces.
Yeah, his face
Rock
didn't
face.
match the delivery, and sometimes he'd do it just a little bit, like he'd shake his head side to side, like kind of squint, but just barely, and this huge note comes out. So
yeah. Well, they had to record it.
And that's an angry face you make when you rock. You make an angry face. So maybe that's why they were doing that, was like, Jesus wouldn't be angry, but every once in a while, he might get a little, just to bring in, again, what Drew said, the human element. He's very, he doesn't let things get to him and everything like that, even when except for when he's flipping over tables.
yeah,
But in other things, even when he's singing those high notes, it's just like, I'm calm.
Yeah.
I'm calm, So, that could have been something they did with the movie. The director wanted to see.
yeah, and you don't get to see all of his reactions with the religious leaders from the Bible in this movie, but the temple scene. I mean, there's only one group of people basically that he got mad at and chewed out. And it was always the religious leaders. It was corrupt religious leaders preventing people from coming to connect with God. So every once in a while, he'd get mad. So maybe you'll get a Jesus metal song during one of those scenes or stories. So later, when Jesus has been arrested, we see Judas talking about who he believes Jesus was. And he says Jesus was not anything more than human. But we also have, Jesus is clearly depicted as God in this movie, but Judas isn't there. So he's still in that place of doubt, right? Did you guys take away that, Jesus said he was God in this film, right? Did you feel like the film was clear on that?
No, the only thing I remember Pilate saying, "So you call yourself God?" At least that's what, and he says, "No, those are your words, not mine."
Yeah, and that's scriptural.
And
Somewhere
that's
else.
so. I never remember Jesus actually proclaiming in this film that I am God. I am
Mhm.
the Son of God. It's like he never says that.
I wish I could find where it was because I thought like I was kind of looking for it because I wanted to just know how will the film portray him, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought he said he was, but maybe I'm imagining that.
I don't remember. I don't recall Jesus ever saying. I remember Pilate bringing it up. Caiaphas brings it up, and he just says, "No, those are your words, not
Yeah,
mine." So I don't ever. I don't remember him actually ever saying, "I am God" or "I am the Son of God."
he
Now, knowing the
allowed.
album as well as you do, did they change any lyrics in the
They
movie?
did change. Well, that line actually is different from in the movie and what's on the album. The album is "Your words, not mine." I think, or that's the movie line. The album says,
So I just took a break to read a little bit. So apparently, this film does not say Jesus is God. You do have people calling him the Son of God, which he doesn't deny. And Son of God is a confusing term today, but at the time, when someone was called a son of God, they were thought to be like the human incarnation of that God, like Pharaoh, Caesar, and the definition kind of started to change a little bit in the New Testament after Jesus. But around this time, if you were called the Son of God, you weren't just a son of God, like a separate being. There was overlap. That's that Trinity idea. You were God in human form, so a separate being but the same. So you could say, well, he didn't deny it when people called him the Son of God, but I must have been imagining that line. I don't know what I heard.
yeah. Doug had asked if there's a difference between the film and the album, and there is a small difference. In the film, Pilate asks him, "So you're Jesus Christ, and you claim to be the Son of God? Is that true?" And in the movie, he says, "Your words, not mine." On the album, when he's asked the same question, his words are, "That's what you say." So he never directly denies it,
Denies it.
but he also doesn't directly confirm it. He leaves it
Yeah.
very ambiguous.
And I believe they cut out the line where he calls himself the Son of Man, right? They didn't show that, did they?
I
And you
don't
will
remember
see me
that either.
riding on the clouds. So
I,
in the Bible, he says, he says, and you will see the Son of Man riding on the clouds. Well, Son of Man was a Jewish title for a god that would become the king of the universe, right? So God would delegate rule of the universe to this Son of Man. So that was a way for him to say that he was God and king of the universe. That's what he got killed for. And that riding on the clouds thing, other religions had this idea of a cloud rider, like Baal. The god Baal was the high god of the Canaanites. And so when he says, you'll see me riding on the clouds, he's saying that he is the most high, like he's God, right? And the God of the Old Testament was known as a cloud rider, or depicted as riding in the clouds. So he says that in the Bible, but I don't believe they put that line here. You kind of have to know the ancient context to understand that he's even saying he's God with those terms in the first place. So even if they left him in, I don't know that modern people would catch it. But
yeah,
the controversy I was reading just now was over, well, they cut out the resurrection and they never explicitly state that Jesus is anything more than a man. And then Judas is going to say, Jesus was just a man. So I don't know if they did that because they didn't want to go there or just because they wanted to leave you with Judas's perspective and then he dies. He doesn't see the resurrection.
right. Yeah, that song where he's talking about he's just a man, because he does a little reprise of the "I don't know how to love him." He's a man, he's just a man, is what he says. And yeah, I mean, from Jesus' perspective, that's could be the way he looked at it too. Maybe Jesus didn't buy into Jesus being, Son of God and resurrection, because yeah, he did. He died before Christ was crucified and resurrected.
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult to say why Judas did what he did. It could be he thought Jesus was crazy in this movie. I know there's speculation that Judas believed. I think this comes from the Gospel of Judas, but I'm not sure. It's one of those late books that was written later and isn't considered a part of the Bible. But I've heard people say this theory. They thought Judas did believe Jesus was God, but Judas thought he would force Jesus' hand if he betrayed him, because he thought when he got arrested, well, Jesus would then overthrow Rome and do the political stuff like he had hoped. But that seems to be speculation. I don't know that we really know why he betrayed Jesus. So to see a kind of a different angle here is interesting, because that's one I didn't thought of. He just didn't believe, and maybe thought that if you heard somebody say they're God and they're not really God, then what do you think? You probably think they're a narcissist or a crazy person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why he went to Caiaphas and said, like, look, I'm only here because I know what needs to be done.
Yeah, he didn't want the money.
Yeah, and he's like, well, we'll pay you in silver. And he's like, I don't want your blood money. This Jesus needs to be stopped. And I think his reasoning was just he's drawing too much attention. So take him out of this so we can go about our business the way that we always had. And I think that's the way Judas was, is how I interpret it in the film of why he does what he does.
That makes a little bit more sense, because it's hard for me to believe it's a political angle, because he wouldn't have committed suicide before Jesus was crucified. If he truly believed that this was going to force Jesus to overthrow and show his power and his strength and everything like that, the power of God, he would have stuck around until literally, they put him into the cave, and he might have stuck around even longer thinking, maybe not at that point. Well, yeah, because if he believed he was the Son of God, maybe he's like, okay, maybe he'll come back now and overthrow him as an angel and bring the power of all the angels or something like that. So yeah, for him to give up Jesus and then hang himself, I don't think it was a political thing. I don't think he believed that Jesus was going to overthrow Rome if he forced it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense to me on that.
Yeah.
No offense against anyone who believes that.
Right.
Yeah. I could be totally wrong. I'm not that smart.
Yeah. I mean, even during the Last Supper, they have their little spat. And Judas said, he comes up to Jesus and he calls him a sad, pathetic man, is what he called Jesus. You sad, pathetic man. He says, you see, all your ideals that you had are just dying because of you. And someone had to turn you in. And I think the line he says is, every time I look at you, I don't understand why you let the things you did get so out of hand. Because you would have managed better if you had a plan. So I think that right there gives you the mindset of Judas. You're uncontrollably out of control. You're just out of control right now. And someone has to do this.
It's very interesting that he thought Jesus didn't have a plan.
Yeah, it's almost like he was just winging it.
Yeah. Because
sometimes it's hard to see the plan.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely got dragged into things that he didn't want to do, because Judas didn't want all these other people around. He wanted that small grassroots revolution. Maybe that's too strong of a word. Impact, at least in this movie.
But even if you look at like the Last Supper, things getting out of control, even the disciples are in a way a little out of control with what they're saying. I always hoped that I'd be a disciple. I knew that I could make it if I tried. And also, it's almost like they're gloating, like we're only here for the publicity. We get to hang out with him and we're stars now. And they kind of like address it that way. That they kind of gloat that we're the disciples. And, I think, again, that kind of turns Judas off.
Yeah, and it didn't bother me that they said that in the film, because I think they were kind of like that at first. Because, like I
It
mentioned,
would be hard.
yeah, they didn't understand. They didn't get
Yeah.
what Jesus's real end game was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that
And they're
"Can I be
human.
the first in heaven" type of thing. Those stories,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're not Jesus. They're not the Son of God. They are human. They are
Mhm.
fallible. Did I say that right? Yeah.
fallible.
They fallible. Thank you. They sin. So, I mean, if Jesus showed up and I knew, yes, this is the guy I'm following, I would follow him. But at the same point, I would enjoy it because, we're going to town and these people are giving us food and giving us wine and kind of taking care of us. And I'm not saying they overdid it, but it's like, I would much rather, travel America and eat decent food, meet nice people, and, kind of become popular than spend the last 48 hours dealing with a fire at my building.
Right.
Yeah,
Which is why I haven't talked that much today. I do apologize. I've been awake for I don't know how long. But anyway, it's just, Matthew was a tax collector. That's not a fun job.
Mm-hmm.
I have to take money for a living, what I do, and I have to track people down. Why haven't you paid? Why haven't you done that? That's what he does every day. Nobody likes him. And now he doesn't have to work. He gets to walk around and talk about cool things and meet cool people and eat and drink. And yeah, so, it would be kind of intoxicating because it's like, I don't have to do these things I hate or, dislike or have to deal with people I don't want to. I can just go out and people come to us and they give us stuff. They stay at my house, use my oils and all this stuff. So absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that they took advantage or anything like that, but it would be hard not to at the same point.
yeah, it's relatable. It's realistic.
100%.
Now,
Not saying they're bad people for that.
right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you would be psyched to be a disciple, and you would gloat a little bit about it.
Mhm.
I'm a Cubs fan. That psychs me up, and I gloat about it. Same thing with Drew.
In this film, everything's so condensed, but in real life, they changed over the course of those 3 years because that's how long they followed him around for. So their perspective changed, but in a 2-hour movie, their focus here, it's Judas and Jesus, so you don't see their character arc necessarily. They're like side characters here. But Judas, I thought it was interesting. I mean, maybe he really thought this, but he believed God framed him and set him up to be Jesus's betrayer. I thought that was interesting. Like, he didn't look at himself and like, what have I done? He turns to God and is like, you made me do this, as if he doesn't have free will. And there are branches within Christianity that don't believe in freedom of choice, like that people can make their own decisions. And I don't know if he's just upset and so he's just saying things. I don't know where the writer's coming from on this, but I did think that was an interesting choice. But I took that as a distorted reality, like he's blame shifting. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm trying to remember the lyrics of the song, but that he's when he's hanging himself. But it is very much he's not taking responsibility for his actions.
Yeah.
I know when he was turning him over, he wanted to be promised that he wouldn't be damned for all time. Like, I don't want to have that curse on me for the rest of everyone's going to know who I am because of this. And that's one thing that he was worried about. And then I think after, they take Jesus away and instead of looking at himself to say, oh man, I may have screwed up. He's just pointing the blame and he's passing the buck. So I definitely think it's that he's not taking responsibility for his own actions.
And that makes a lot more sense too. If you talk about in real life is, he very well could have been, give me my silver. Here's where he's going to be. I don't want to be that guy. There's a lot of people that love Jesus. I don't want to be that guy. And maybe they found that, rumors travel pretty fast. And maybe he's walking around town. He's like, okay, what am I going to buy with my silver? Oh, hey, that's that guy who gave up Jesus. And all of a sudden, he knows where his life is going after this. So, that makes a lot more sense than a political to me.
Yeah. In this story, he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He says, in the song, he's like, I know you can't hear me, but I only did what you wanted me to.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, I'd sell out the nation, but now I've been saddled with the murder of you.
Yeah.
I have been spattered with innocent blood, and my name will be dragged through the mud. And that's where that's what's turning him on to, like, so I did all this stuff, and I thought I was doing right, and now I'm going to be hated. I'm going to be known as a traitor, and can't live with it.
Yeah, see, I wondered the way they phrase it. I mean, it could easily be taken as Judas didn't have a choice. God made him do this. And I bring that up because I've heard that taught before, but that's not what probably most Christians would believe. I don't think that. I think maybe Judas was vulnerable, so God allowed this to happen because this needed to happen. But I don't think he ever put him on rails and set him on this path where the only thing he could do was betray Jesus. I still think God probably knew the choices he'd make, but personally, I'm a free will person, so that's part of my theology. Not everybody believes that.
No, I think it's your own choice. I think he made that choice, and he just couldn't live with the consequences.
Yeah. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention here. Did the crucifixion scene impact you guys?
It always does in one way or another. I mean, it's not a spoiler warning type thing, so you're expecting it, but if you really, you got to be in the right mode too. I mean, if you're watching the movie and enjoying the rock music and enjoying the dancing and everything like that, it may take you out of that a little bit. But when you get to that scene, you remember, why you're a Christian, and whether it's in that or in The Passion or in Willem Dafoe's version. Jesus
Last
Christ
Temptation of Christ.
Or that one. Thank you. Last Temptation. Or, there's so many different versions of it. And of course, you see it portrayed every Easter, and you see people walking through the streets and things like that. Every seeing that from time to time, you always get a little bit, it's just like, that, he did that for us. So yeah, you can get a little emotional here and there, and the way you look at the music can put you in it more or take it out more. So, but yeah, definitely got a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, this is, I'm enjoying a good movie with great music, but I got to remember who it's about.
Yeah. And that's the only scene in the whole movie where the dialogue is actually spoken and not done in song. I think he's got a couple lines.
Why have you forgotten me?
Why have you forsaken me? Where's my mother? I'm thirsty. Forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And it is finished.
But they're all in beat. So basically he was rapping.
Yeah, I mean they are in time, but yeah, it's not singing. But yeah. It's I mean you have to have that. And I think they did it the right way, because I think had they done that with electric guitars blaring and he's singing it, like it wouldn't have had the same impact. So I'm glad that they filmed it the way that they did.
Yeah, and I think it had impact for me, and I was a little surprised by that, because I don't know that I was really that drawn in by this Jesus. I more saw this as an interesting study. I thought watching what they did with the story and the angle they took was interesting, but I wasn't really drawn to this Jesus until that scene, and then that scene had some impact for me. And I also wanted to mention that "Why have you forsaken me?" That is one of the most, I would say, misunderstood quotes of Jesus. Maybe not one of the most, but it sticks out to me because most people, I mean, it sounds like Jesus is doubting when he says that, right? I mean, that's probably what you've all been taught, because I was taught that too, right?
Mm-hmm. I take it as he's kind of wondering, when is the end coming? Why haven't I died yet? Like, why am I still alive? You know?
Yeah, I like that take because I hadn't heard
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So about a year ago, I was reading a chapter in the Bible on the crucifixion, and I get to that line, that verse, "Why have you forsaken me?" And I saw there was a footnote there, and I looked at it, and it said Psalm 22. So then I went and looked up Psalm 22. Now note that in the Gospels, when Jesus says, "Why have you forsaken me?" it says that he's praying. Well, when I went to Psalm 22, he's praying that psalm. It's called, in the ESV, it's called "Why Have You Forsaken Me?" Because that's the first line, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But some Bibles call it the Psalm of the Righteous Sufferer. So it starts out with this, "Why are you so far from saving me from my words and from my groaning?" And he's like, "Why have you forgotten me?" But it works it works its way through that psalm to where he changes and he starts saying, "Well, I'll trust you anyways. I know that you care about me." And he says later, "From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will perform before those who fear him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever." So that's the end of that same psalm. So I think what happens is he starts praying a psalm, which was kind of a normal thing back then, and he dies at the beginning of that psalm.
Oh,
Interesting.
very interesting.
Because it goes from doubt to trust, and he never got to the trust part because he died.
Right.
So I don't
Wow.
think I think maybe he was feeling very human at the moment, but I don't take it like he really thought God was deserting him after discovering that he's just quoting something.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
It is very cool.
That gives
Again,
us
one of
hope.
those things where it's like you're taught something for 48 years, and then it's like, well, look at it this way. And it's like, that makes more sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he says he knows he's going to be sacrificed. He's going to die for people's sins, and then he gets up there and it's like, "Why have you forsaken me, Dad?" And it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what they told us in Sunday school. So okay, he was having doubts. Okay, that doesn't fit, but okay, whatever. Now, 48 years later, it's like,
It makes so much more. Yeah, it changes that line completely.
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yeah, and I was 36 when I found that. I'd been hearing that Jesus was doubting for 36 years. I mean, well, and maybe he felt that, but I think it does change the story to know what he's actually speaking from.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
So,
Makes it
Drew,
cooler.
you shared some cool stuff earlier, a list of who almost played Jesus in this movie. Do you want to share what you
Yeah.
found?
So when they were doing casting and they're trying to figure out, hey, who are we going to have play Jesus in this movie? They made a list, and on that list was Mick Jagger, of the Rolling Stones, John Lennon, formerly of the Beatles,
Nice.
Paul McCartney, formerly of the Beatles, Barry Gibb, the Bee Gees.
Yeah, he would have been great.
He would have been singing falsetto the whole time, though.
That'd be great.
And then they finally did this audition, and Ted Neely came in wearing blue jeans and had a 20-minute meeting with them, and they said, "You know what? I think that's our guy." But yeah, so they almost had a very interesting to think about listening to this, the music, and then picturing some of these guys singing it. The Barry Gibb, I can't.
I want to hear that.
Yeah.
That'd be cool to hear. Because I love the Bee Gees too.
I love the Bee Gees too, but I'm trying to. I can't listen to.
I know, but I wonder, if it gives it a little disco feel, or maybe something a little poppy or something like that. I don't know. I'm not saying it would be better. I just want to hear it.
Right. Instead of yelling, "Get out," I'd be like, "Get out!"
Oh, I love it.
Be
Well,
amazing.
being that it's 2023, it's 50 years from when this movie came out. The 50th anniversary album is out now. So we will put a link in the description to this video if you want to buy that on Amazon. So we're part of a nonprofit called Brewery Ministries. So if you follow that link, we're affiliates with Amazon. So we'll make a tiny percentage off of your purchase. But if you want to get that album, links in the description.
Below.
Well, any last words?
It is finished.
Sasquatch.
Excellent. Well, since this was such a unique take on the story of Jesus, looking at it through Judas's eyes, guys, put in the comments what you thought of this movie, whether you enjoyed it, whether it bothered you, whether there's anything new, any new perspective that you saw when you watched it. Let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you guys. So,
and if you haven't watched it, check it out, because it is another one of those historical films where, you know, it did have a lot of controversy in the middle of it, and get a feel for the way filming was done back in the 60s and 70s. We talked about this a few times with like Rocky and Star Wars and The Exorcist past podcasts. You know, the 70s and the 60s, they filmed differently. It feels different. So kind of check it out and get a feel for way film was done, maybe probably before a lot of you were born. So, you know, just to kind of get a feel for that. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I almost forgot to ask you guys, do you recommend this movie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you got to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the music's great.
It is.
At least, I mean, everyone's got, you know, one of the 5 places you can download music for pretty much free. You know, pull up the Jesus Christ Superstar album, listen to it.
Yeah.
If you like it, then look for the movie. I mean, you can probably rent it on Amazon for like $2. So
yeah, and there's a lot of different versions. There's the original cast recording, there's the film version, there's the 2000 version. My recommendation is either the original cast recording or the film recording. Those are I think, in my opinion, the 2 best.
Okay.
The originals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
always the best.
I would say if you don't like musicals and you're interested in this story, I would check out The Chosen before I would check out this. But if you like musicals, you know, if you just like every iteration of Jesus' story, check this out. The music is going to be very 60s, 70s style. So if that's not your thing, you may not like this version. But it is worth checking out, especially if you know the story, because it's definitely a different angle that I think is thought-provoking. I know it was controversial, you know, that Jesus wasn't necessarily explicitly depicted as God and the resurrection was left out. But I mean, it's okay. Like, you don't have to take the film's interpretation, but it's an interesting study. So I think it's worth seeing if you think that you would like this movie. So
yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. And guys, we will be back soon with another movie review. Not sure what we're doing next, but we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Later.